Yeah, I was gonna say, man, it's like, how weird is it that the last time we saw each other in Manhattan, like we had no idea that this would this would be the next time. The next time we met, it would be under such weird circumstances, you know.
A year later, after not sitting down with anybody. Yeah, no, that because this was right before. That was in November of 19, right?
Yeah, like right before, just like literally a couple of weeks slash a couple months. A few weeks slash a couple of months before everything really kicked off, and man, a lot has changed.
It seems like a different world, doesn't it? Yeah,
it is, man. It's like a science fiction movie, and it's like you always love science fiction movies, and you always like kind of imagine what you would do, but actually living through one is not that fun.
Right, I was going to say, those are supposed to stay in the imagination, right?
Right. So I only have you for about 30 minutes, so I want to kind of like run through a few questions here.
All right.
First of all, the big thing, I don't know if you guys follow the chatter on on Twitter AR, you know, like just like the AR people on Twitter. And right after maybe about a few days after, maybe a week after the announce of Mesh, the question came up as to the beautiful, you know, referencing the beautiful video. Like that video demo of like Mesh is just, it's incredible. It's not only the reason why I think a lot of people got excited by it is because it not only looks like science fiction, but, you know we now have the top technology via HoloLens and I guess Kinect, and, you know, the software and everything. We can actually do this. But one person raised the question, hey, wait. This, what they're talking about right now is possible via like kind of simplistic avatars, but the more realistic, I guess, volumetric, holographic looking stuff, you know, that was represented in the video, that requires sensors. So and we all kind of sussed that out and kind of like worked it out on our own. We think we know that is the case, but I wanted to just let you go on the record and kind of describe what exactly we're seeing in the video in terms of what's possible.
Yeah, I think the short answer to the discussion is yes, that is correct. And the way that we describe it is that one of the core capabilities of Microsoft Mesh is a sense of presence, giving you this true ability to feel like you are in a physical location that is, you know, hundreds or thousands of miles away from you. So to be somewhere where you are not is a key capability of this technology. And the way that we represent your agency, your presence remotely, is really, it falls somewhere on a spectrum that you've described. At one end of the spectrum, the more simple end of the spectrum, is an avatar. And in this case, you've seen from the videos and other demos that this is we started with the AltSpace avatar system. And the team has brought that over onto Azure, actually. And so now it'll inherit all of the enterprise grade management and security and other things that folks expect from Azure. But that's kind of the simplest form, the simplest end of the spectrum. If you are wearing a HoloLens, the HoloLens has, the positional tracking and environmental sensing cameras in it. And so the sensors in the HoloLens are able to follow you as you move. Your head moves, your avatar's head will move, your hands. Interestingly, in Mesh, one of the cool things about HoloLens 2, of course, is that it does fully articulated hand tracking, as you've seen. HoloLens 2 looks at 25 distinct points of articulation on each hand. And so when you're wearing a HoloLens and you're using Mesh, you will be represented as an avatar, but that avatar will have the same full degree of hand motion that you do in HoloLens 2. So that's kind of the simplest end of the spectrum. And the key phrase that you used was you need more sensors in order to have that fully volumetric captured or to move along that continuum from an avatar to a more kind of full holoportation. You need more sensors. The sensors in the HoloLens don't capture your body volumetrically. They capture your 6 degrees of freedom motion through space, and they capture all of your hand motions. But we don't capture your full body. Now, there's a couple of options, and one of the things that if you look closely at the video, you'll see different kind of versions, different instantiations of that presence. And the first is with avatars, the simplest. The next one, you see a reference to somebody to the Azure Connect developer kit and that camera. The Azure Connect depth sensing camera is the same depth sensing sensor in HoloLens 2. And what that does is if you have one of those cameras, you'll see I think they're playing chess or they're working on a table on something, and the guy's kind of leaning forward, and you see he's volumetrically captured. He's kind of pixelated, but you see only the front of him. Now, that's what would happen if you have one of these Kinect cameras. Or, of course, you could use other depth sensing technologies. You could use LiDAR. You could use, something else. This particular camera is a time-of-flight infrared camera that we use in Kinect. But that's a step up from just using the sensors built into the HoloLens to track you and to just represent you as an avatar. I use the HoloLens as an example. There's actually a simpler version would be if you're in a headset that doesn't have fully articulated hand tracking, that just has controllers, then you would have more like the AltSpace hands, right? Where you would be able to, do the grab motion and that's about it.
Yeah, I wanted to key in on that because I have used AltSpace VR for a very long time. I think even before you guys acquired them. Right. I think that was in 2017, right? Was it 2017?
Yes, October. I think it was October 2017. We made that announcement down in San Francisco. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've been like a very long time user and love it. I often tell people in VR, it's, high fidelity and like, these kind of like this idea that you would be in like literally like the Matrix, like the movie it's not necessary. Good enough is what you need. And I think that was borne out with Burning Man this past year, right, which I attended. And I have to tell you, I had never been to Burning Man in real life, but I attended this one in VR, in AltSpace VR. And I went to so many rooms, like dozens of rooms over the course of like 6 hours. And they embraced me. I mean, complete strangers. They treated me as though I was these are like old school, like veteran burners. They treated me like family. They gave me like kind of like this, I think there's like a kind of like a traditional introduction, whatever kind of process. And I say all that to say like what you just said about the avatars in the demo video, that took me aback. You said, so you're saying that with the AltSpace VR avatars, through the mesh system, that avatar now has, at least when you're using the HoloLens, has articulated hand motions. Like that's something. I mean, I'm just confirming that is in fact what I heard.
Yeah, it's really cool, and it's kind of interesting especially if you're used to AltSpace VR and the experience you have, because typically for me anyway, I have controllers in my hand when I'm in AltSpace, and so I see there's a limited range of motion that your hands can represent there, but because of what HoloLens has and because of the sensors involved to do the hand tracking. We're able to represent that in the AltSpace avatar. And so I think it's really it ties to the fundamental underlying issue that you brought up here is like, if there is a continuum, if there's a range of ways that I can be presented is that I personally can have agency in this virtual space, and really the only thing that determines where I sit on that continuum is how many sensors I have pointed at me, how many things are tracking me in full, 360 degrees. And if it's a bunch of high def cameras, then I look like me. If it's just the environmental and positional trackers in the HoloLens, for example, then I'm an avatar. Or if I'm just wearing my VR headset, then I'm an avatar. But the important aspect there really is regardless of where you sit on that continuum, the sense of true presence is the thing. And from being in AltSpace that when you go to AltSpace and you stand next to someone and introduce yourself to a stranger and they look at you and you have eye contact, it kind of really feels like you're meeting a new person and talking to them because you are, just not physically. And so that sense of presence and true agency, like you really feel like you're standing next to that person, that's kind of the magic here. And that does happen even in a kind of simplified representation of you as an avatar. Now it gets more immersive and more real, obviously, the more sensors you have around you. But regardless of where you sit on that continuum, you'll feel like you're really there.
Now, just help me understand something. Like, is this kind of cross-platform? Meaning, because I haven't really delved deep into Mesh and really analyzed it as thoroughly as I want to yet.
Sure.
So let's say I'm on one end using the HoloLens 2, and the person on the other end is represented by an avatar. What would they be using? Like, give me the different circumstances that they would use to kind of connect. I'm assuming, like, let's just assume the other person doesn't have a HoloLens 2.
Exactly. Yeah. So I have to be, before I go into the answer fully, I want to make a distinction between Mesh, the platform, and the service, the cloud services that deliver these capabilities and that developers can build into their applications. That's one kind of definition of Mesh. Mesh is a immersive collaboration cloud service, mixed reality collaboration cloud service, and any developer can write in the same way that any game developer writing a game for Xbox can automatically make it a multiplayer networked game by plugging into Xbox Live. Mesh makes any application a immersive, collaborative, mixed reality application by plugging into just by using the Mesh SDK and adding that capability to your app. So that app could run on HoloLens. It could run on it could run on Oculus. You could be in a Windows mixed reality headset. You could be on a PC or a Mac or a smartphone. So the execution environment where you run a mesh enabled application, that's cross-platform. That's what we're the service ultimately. Now we don't yet, because we just rolled out preview, in preview it doesn't yet support all of those target execution environments, but it will in short order. We haven't put a timeline on that, but we're working hard on it. And the vision is exactly that. Regardless of what device you're on, you should be able to participate to some degree in Mesh. And you should be able to run an application that is Mesh enabled so that you can collaborate in three-dimensional virtual spaces with your friends and colleagues. Now, it's worth pointing out, as you can imagine, there's a difference depending on the hardware that you're using. If you and I are both wearing HoloLens, we could run a Mesh application and we would be represented by avatars, and we could walk around each other in a virtual table and share and collaborate and work on a drawing or an architectural diagram or whatever we're working on. But if someone joined that meeting and they're sitting at their laptop, they are on a two-dimensional screen and they don't have positional tracking built into their device. So they, if they walk around their room, they don't move. They would have to have like a cursor navigation. But we could invite that person to our meeting. So here we are in our meeting, Greg and Adario wearing their HoloLens 2, represented as avatars walking around this virtual table, collaborating on a masterpiece. And we want to invite somebody else, but they don't have a HoloLens. Now, ultimately, this is we don't have this built into the app yet, but ultimately that person would be able to join, say, via a mesh-enabled version of Microsoft Teams. You could imagine we could be having this meeting in a future version of Microsoft Teams that is mesh-enabled, and we did commit to that. We didn't commit to a time frame on that one either, but we will have a mesh-enabled version of Teams. And so I could be having that meeting, and then we invite someone in who's just sitting at their PC. Now, how would that look? You and I are walking around the room. To me, it looks like I'm here in my home office. To you, it's where you're sitting right now. And we both walk around the room and we see a representation of the other person and the digital objects on which we're collaborating. And so the third person joins the room, but they don't have a HoloLens. Well, they might show up as just a 2D window. Gotcha. A video screen that pops up, and we can walk around them. Now we're walking around three-dimensional digital objects. I'm showing you the cool, architecture design that I'm building, and I want your feedback on. And the person on the 2D screen can look and can see it as well through their window into the world, which is their computer. And then you can imagine that person, if they wanted to move around the physical space or the virtual space rather, that we're in, they could maybe use the cursor keys on their keyboard to kind of fly around that room. If they wanted to get closer to the architectural diagram, they might be able to kind of zoom in on it and see. And so they could have some sense that there is volume, there's three-dimensionality to the space that you and I are collaborating in, and they could kind of feel like they're part of that. Now, they can't walk around the room and have it represented by an avatar in the same way that you and I can, and they don't really have the same sense of immersion and presence, but they kind of get it, right? And so the idea here is twofold. The first is that if we built this thing and said that you could only use it if you have a HoloLens, that pretty much limits the number of people that could actually use the thing, because you got to have a HoloLens. There's a lot more people with a smartphone in their pocket than with a HoloLens. And so we looked at all of the endpoints and all of the ways that people are today starting to experience mixed reality, whether it's, Pokemon Go or other things. And we said, boy, there is a way. These smart devices have AR frameworks. iOS and Android have AR Core and AR Kit, and you can use the existing frameworks. And we can add capability so that developers can build an app for that platform, whether it's an iPhone or a Mac or a PC, and they can add mesh capability to their app. So that when you run it, you automatically get. Now, if you're on a 2D screen, you'll notice you have a different experience than the person wearing a HoloLens or a VR headset. But in an interesting way, we think that could create a little bit of, demand and interest. It's like, hey, I want to have that experience. I want this to feel more immersive. What do I need to have this be so I can feel like I'm actually in the room with you guys? Right. And the answer is an immersive headset. If you want a more immersive experience, you need a more immersive technology than a smartphone. And so in an interesting way, it might create demand for more immersion.
I wanted to, so two things. First, I think, so now that you kind of laid it out, which was my general understanding, but I like the specificity with which you laid everything out. I think part of some people's confusion was often when we're thinking about the world of 3D and the metaverse, when we hear the word mesh in general, we think of this layer, this kind of like virtual layer over everything and tracking everything. Whereas I think in this case, mesh actually just means bringing everything together. Like, yes, there is kind of like this virtual layer kind of bringing everything, together. But in this case, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in this case, it doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as what we would normally come to think of as mesh in the 3D sense. It's more bringing things together. Do I kind of have that right? Or
yes,
okay,
yes, I think and we realized that there was both kind of existing interpretations of the word mesh and kind of some legacy former even Microsoft products or things that we're talking about. But I think it kind of fit well, because it really, what we're talking about is a substrate that enables that connection between people and that ability to feel present. And so that's exactly what mesh is all about.
Okay. And so the other thing, so I don't have you for very long. So the other thing is like a touchy question. A lot of this feels like, other than the cloud enabled, well, actually that might be part of it too. I'm not sure. But a lot of this feels like spatial. And I know you guys have had like a very friendly, close relationship with spatial over the last couple of years. So I'm just wondering, does this impact in any way what you guys are doing with spatial? Is there still a relationship with spatial? Do you feel like there's any kind of like overlap or potential, whatever road bumps between you guys now in terms of?
No, that's a great question. And I think, so I'm not personally involved in that relationship. I know Alex Kipman is personally involved, and he will tell you that he's working very closely with the folks at Spatial. And here's how he described it to me: the Spatial team is a startup. It's a pretty small outfit, right? That's not a whole lot of people.
Right.
They are today investing a considerable amount of their resources, their development resources, and overall company resources, in fact, in the development and maintenance of what we would call kind of plumbing, right? How do I manage the session? How do I how do I lock the holograms? How do I establish that sense of presence? There's a bunch of kind of network connectivity plumbing aspects to enabling these collaborative scenarios, and they had to build it because it didn't exist, and so they built it for their app and to enable it. But I think it's akin to I used to work I'd be a network engineer, and we used to sell $200 TCP/IP stacks, protocol stacks, right? Which every IoT device in the world comes with a TCP/IP protocol transport stack in it, and it was a thing that I used to charge $200 a seat for. The world evolved, and we solved a problem generally. We said, look, let's not require every application that wants to have this capability to build all of the plumbing in and then redo that for every app. And we would rebuild all of those kind of plumbing services in a different, incompatible way for each application. So instead, and I think that this is another place where the Xbox Live example comes in. Before that service, there was multiplayer networked gaming, but the ISV, the app developer, had to build that capability into every game they built, or each ISV had their own different platform that they would have to build. And so what happened was, people realized, boy, the idea of having networked multiplayer gaming is something that is pretty generally applicable, and we should just solve that problem more broadly for the industry, enable it as a service that any ISV can build into their application. And then we won't have the situation where we have, separate, incompatible walled gardens of solutions for this type of thing. And so I think the longer answer to your question about spatial is that we're solving a problem generally, so that any developer can build in collaborative, shared, immersive experiences into their application. And this is going to mean that spatial, and this is what Alex has talked to them about, they can work with us on that plumbing maintenance of the collaborative, the substrate piece, and then they can add and kind of focus some of their investment and their resources on things to differentiate their service and their application.
Yeah,
and so I think
what I'm thinking.
Yeah,
is,
it's a story we've seen.
What I'm thinking is it's less that mesh is in any way necessarily competing with spatial. It's more that mesh is now allowing a lot of people to compete better with spatial. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and they've got a head start, and they've got a very clear idea of the value proposition that they're offering, and in some ways this will enable them to even increase the focus on their offering. And so we this is an idea that has happened before in our industry, right? There's a really hard thing to do that offers a lot of benefit, and so somebody solves that problem once. And then people look at this and say, boy, how many times do we want to solve this problem? Do we want to keep solving it for every application? Or is there a generalized approach that someone can provide that presents us with a foundation upon which we can all build our own kind of interpretation and go off to meet the needs of our specific audience?
Yeah,
I think that's what's happening here. Yeah,
it's almost like it reminds me of like the web browser days when everyone was trying to figure out, what layer to use to access the internet in a more user-friendly way. So this is almost like a web browser for reality, meaning mesh.
Yeah.
Like kind of like allowing people to create, well, mesh not itself, but allowing people to create various web browsers for reality. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's almost more like some of the underlying standards that we say, here's how some of these foundational plumbing issues can be solved, and then you can build on top of that. Right. And the approach is it's interesting because the way the one of the dynamics that we anticipate is something that we saw with speaking of Kinect, when we did Kinect for Windows, right? So Kinect was
hello. Oh no, I can't hear you.
Dream.
Oh, you cut out for a bit. You cut out for about 10 seconds.
Am I back? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'm back. So Kinect. One of the things that was really the start of this whole journey, and so hang on, I'm sorry, I get a little feedback here. But in any sense, yeah, that's I totally forget the point I was going to make. But it'll
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Sorry
well, no, you answered my question to my satisfaction, and I hope to listeners' satisfaction. So moving forward, I mean, like, what I kind of want to like begin to wrap up, but we just heard about like kind of like the development or like the next iteration of kind of and I know you're not really here to speak about this other stuff, but I got to take a chance here and see if what you'll give me. The military contract, the development of the specialized HoloLens headsets for the military. Do you have any tea on that? Any info or any kind of perspective on what's happening there?
No, I'm not as close to that these days, but we have been working with the Department of Defense, the U.S. Army, to develop a device for them as part of the IVAS program, and it's going really well. We won a contract to build a prototype, and based on the Army's evaluation of that, they'll look at the final production contract. So we expect to hear more on that relatively soon.
Gotcha. Just had to take a shot.
Yeah. No, I mean there's a whole bunch of interesting things about that, the approach that they're taking, but it's a new way of industry and Department of Defense working together, and I think it's going to set some, just a new way of being smarter about how we build things.
So to wrap up on Mesh, just give me some specifics. Like, are there cost tiers? Is there a developer, professional, enterprise level? Like, give me the nitty gritty. Like, how how is this actually going to be rolled out in terms of accessibility?
Well, we haven't announced,
okay.
So we haven't given a lot of detail, and that's why you haven't heard any. What I think that the way to think about the important parts of this from that standpoint in terms of how we go to market. Number one, I think this is another case where not to harp too much on the Xbox Live example, because one way the Xbox Live example is not appropriate, for example, is that is not cross-platform. So this is like Xbox Live that's cross-platform. So another way that it's like Xbox Live is that it doesn't cost a developer anything to build this capability in. We will make Mesh freely available in the SDK for developers to build this capability into any application, in the same way that any game developer can build Xbox Live at no cost to them, because the assumption is that I have an Xbox Live. You make that a requirement for the game, and then the developer can just assume that that's a service that the user has. I think you can think of Mesh in the same ways, that for developers it'll be free. They can build it into any app, and then they just assume that the person using the application has the ability to access the service.
And so I'm guessing that, like, with the cloud component, that there will be some, I don't know, fee structure with that component.
Yes, I think that's a safe assumption, and I think we haven't announced any of the details, but we've used some of these analogies, and again, this is an area where the Xbox Live one might be appropriate to say there's some type of subscription, or there's some type of service that I use. And again, it can depend, and this is the part where we haven't given the details because I think some of that stuff's being figured out. Part of what we're trying to do with the preview is get feedback from developers. Oh, I know what I started to say. I was starting talking about Kinect, and I said when we did Kinect for Windows, we saw an explosion of creativity from developers about how Kinect would be used. We saw people using it, surgeons in operating rooms, conductors conducting orchestras. There was ballets. There was all these really interesting ways of using the Kinect depth sensing camera that had nothing to do with Xbox gaming. And that was a direct result of the creativity of developers getting their hands on it. And I think the point I was going to make that I just remembered is that now that we're in preview, turning this over to developers is going to teach us so much about how this can be used. And so we expect a whole bunch of innovation to happen. And part of this process now will be, okay, what are the key scenarios? What is the business model? How does it make sense? What are the the different use cases and requirements and how might this all fit together. And so that's part of what we're figuring out, frankly, during this preview process is, we have some ideas, obviously, but we haven't finalized them. So we didn't want to kind of announce a bunch of, SKUs and pricing and all that stuff and just have to undo it, because we do expect to learn a lot from this preview. So I think as we roll forward over the next few months, we'll get more and more feedback from folks using the preview. And that will inform kind of our decisions around, product, how we go to market. What are the SKUs? What are the pricing, and how do you get mesh?
Gotcha.
And so that's the stuff we're figuring out now.
Okay, and then finally, for those who aren't kind of like steeped in the various suite of software offerings from Microsoft, just give me like a kind of like a basic idea of how Mesh sits alongside or differentiates itself from Azure. Like what the two services are both like cloud oriented. So can you just differentiate for like the person new to these services?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. The way I would say it is that Microsoft Mesh is an Azure service. It is a collaborative, immersive platform that uses Azure to deliver those capabilities. It is in effect an Azure cloud service. It uses it'll utilize the Azure remote rendering that we introduced a couple of years ago. It uses Azure to manage your identity, whether that's through Azure Active Directory or through your Microsoft account. So it's right to think of Microsoft Mesh as a service built on Azure.
Gotcha. Okay, and then finally, like just since this is audio, can you tell people like where to find out more about Mesh?
That feels like a question I should know off the top of my head.
You don't have mesh.com? Oh my God.
I don't.
Heresy, sacrilege.
That's like a 101.
Okay, well, no. It's fine. They can just go to Microsoft and look around for Mesh, Microsoft.com. I know you guys have that domain. So
we do. We have Microsoft.com/mesh.
Gotcha.
Is actually the place. I just found it.
Oh, and before I let you go, one thing I wanted to tell you is like with this whole NFT craze going on, I keep getting people coming to me who are artists. They're traditional artists, but they aren't VR artists. They're not AR artists, and they're wondering like, hey, how can I create some cool virtual, I don't know, scenes or objects or whatever. And I've been directing a lot of people toward Maquette.
Oh, good. So. I was just going to say that. Maquette is a really powerful tool for creating. I mean, it was designed to create user interfaces and experiences for immersive applications, but as you know, you can use it to do any kind of 3D content. It's a really powerful tool.
Yeah, it's deceptively simple because when I first opened it, I just thought, because there are just so many building block VR apps out there. But when I actually used it and also kind of explored some of the existing demos that are in there, it's deceptively powerful. So that's why I've been suggesting it to people who are like complete newbies, have no coding skill, no real familiarity with like virtual creation. So, maybe you guys will see more uptick there.
Good.
But by the way, since I asked about T, anything on AltSpace VR, anything going on of note beyond this very interesting kind of avatar thing that we discussed earlier?
Well, nothing to announce today, but I think one of the things that we've been talking to folks about is folks have pointed out that, boy, that AltSpace acquisition is sure making a lot of sense right now. And I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And I tell you, one of the things, here, I referred to the idea that, the avatar system in Microsoft Mesh is from AltSpace. We took the AltSpace avatar engine basically and brought it over to Azure, and then built it into Mesh, and then that's actually going to round trip, and that will become it will make the round trip back to AltSpace with some of the added capabilities. So we think that this is really just the beginning. I don't expect this to be the last time that someone says to me, wow, that AltSpace acquisition sure makes sense now. That's
Right,
all I'll
right,
say about that. I think
right.
the team has bigger plans longer term for how that fits into this. And I think part of this whole announcement is really the culmination. You've been following us for a while, and you know that this started with Microsoft Kinect a long time ago, and the vision that Alex Kipman had about bringing the digital and physical worlds together, and all along the way, the notion of that experience being collaborative was part of the vision that he had. Now, we just came to the point now where the technology and everything else has caught up to that vision, and we're able to roll out Mesh in preview. But this was always the vision. HoloLens or the Windows mixed reality headsets, or any of these experiences, really, this, they're kind of, until you go into something like AltSpace, they're kind of isolating.
Right.
Like if I put on my headset and I go into the Cliff House and I'm the only one there.
Right.
There's nobody there, baby. And so this notion of collaboration and inherently shared, by default, shared experiences that have all the right, access privileges and controls and security and privacy and so forth. That's another reason why having it be an Azure service is important. But that notion of these experiences, these immersive experiences being so much more powerful when they're shared is really kind of a no-brainer if you think about it. Yeah, it's super cool to go into a virtual world. It is profoundly more compelling, in my view, to meet new people and make new friends in a virtual world. And so the notion of having these experiences be inherently collaborative was always part of the vision. And it required us to do things like, if you see the stepwise kind of progress toward this goal, Kinect came out, HoloLens 1 came out, HoloLens 2 came out and had fully articulated hand tracking and cloud services now that would make the experiences even better. So now that we built the foundations along the way and it started introducing things like Azure, spatial anchors and remote rendering, well, those elements are a core part of what Mesh does as well. And so we've been building the steps along this path all along the way. And we're really excited now that we can share Mesh with the world. I'll share something with you, Dario. When we were in New York when was it? I guess a little over a year ago, we were planning our Mobile World Congress presentation for February of 2020. Mm-hmm. And at Mobile World Congress in February 2020, our plan was to do a demo of Mesh. Uh-huh. Now, it didn't really it didn't fully exist yet, so it was going to be a little bit of magic demo pixie dust sprinkled on there, because it was a little further away. But we were going to share with the world our vision of these immersive collaboration platform, and then we were going to say, we expect to go into preview, later this year or next year or whenever it was. So Mobile World Congress got canceled, so we didn't do that. But the team kept working and plugging away. And so the result is a year later, we announced Mesh. And instead of saying, hey, we got this new thing, it's coming in a year, we were able to say, hey, we got this new thing and you can go start using it now. And so that was pretty cool.
I said I was going to let you go, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you this one last question. So given what we just experienced in this past year with the pandemic, your remote work has become the norm. A lot of people are video conferencing. And a lot of people have begun to look at AR and VR as kind of like, these alternatives. Now, not everyone has waded into the water. A lot of people are still like keeping it extremely simple, via video. But I'm just wondering, like, as someone who's been so close to the AR side of what's happening at Microsoft, HoloLens, like, what have you learned over this past year? Like, is there any anecdotal situation that you came across or learnings, things that you just discovered over the past year with regard to how we can and will use AR, like, moving forward?
Yeah, I think, I don't think anything more deeply insightful than what everybody else has kind of realized is that, hey, wow, for a lot of these use cases, we're able to continue doing our jobs. For those of us who are information workers in particular, we're still doing our jobs. And it's the ability to do that remotely is entirely because of technology. Now, one of the things that we're also realizing is that it shows the importance of that sense of presence. Everybody's got, Zoom or Teams burn out a little bit, and that those tools have been amazing because those are what has enabled us to continue to do our jobs through this. But it's also highlighted, some of the things that we don't get from those experiences. We don't get a sense of kind of spontaneous collaboration. We don't get the hallway conversations. We don't get the true sense of presence. We don't get the looking me in the eye. There's some things that we really miss that, to some degree, and we're not claiming that this will replace all in-person meetings, obviously, because there are some times when you really do need to be in person and want to be in person.
Right.
But I think one of the things that we've learned over the last year is, some of the meetings could have been emails, and some of the business trips could have been, Teams calls. So I think we're seeing how technology can improve the way that we work. And for me personally, I'm not commuting anymore, and boy, that's been a life changer. So I think this is a case where technology can really help us solve some of the problems that we're faced with. And I think the last year, the pandemic has been an accelerant of the acceptance of that notion. I don't think it has fundamentally changed anything really, other than perhaps kind of speeding some stuff up that was likely to happen anyway.
Gotcha. Great answer. I'm excited for the future. I'm excited to try Mesh. So we're supposed to do, we're going to have like a little demo session in the coming days, yeah? Yeah. I've got to figure out, we were going to try to do that today, and I ran into a little glitch. So we're going to get that glitch figured out so that we can kind of figure out how to share this with you remotely. And so I look forward to that. Well, yeah, one experiment at a time. This Twitter Spaces thing was experiment enough. So I'm happy we didn't have two.
Once we got it working, it seemed to be okay.
Yeah. Hey, Greg, I appreciate it. Again, just for the listeners, this is Dario Strange, editor of nextreality.net. And this has been Greg Sullivan from Microsoft talking about Mesh. Greg, thanks again, man. I really appreciate the time.
My pleasure, Dario. Great talking with you.
All right, cheers.
Cheers.